Today I'm going to be reading this brand new book of mine called Caught Up to you guys. Chapter 1. As bullets whizzed all around Michael and a knife shot past him and stuck in a wall near him with a thud, he ran around a corner and vaulted nimbly over a 6-foot-high wooden fence. Peeking through a knothole, he readied his gun for any pursuers. Big Z's big head and big mouth had gotten them into yet another feud with the South Side. To be honest, Michael was pretty tired of the constant battles every single weekend. Couldn't they ever just have a weekend to chill, sleep in, play some video games? A few members of the South Side came around the corner into Michael's sights, but after Michael fired a few shots at them over the fence, they made a hasty retreat. If he lived to be 18, Michael decided, as he continued his discontented thoughts, he would join the military. It had to be less dangerous than this. Suddenly, he heard voices off to his right. They were coming to attack his ambush from a different direction. Taking off to his left, he kept running, looking for a good spot from which to take on what was coming after him. Vaguely, he wondered how the rest of his gang was surviving their parts of the fight. Just ahead of him, a wooden door in a brick wall that probably surrounded someone's garden opened suddenly, and a man dressed all in white stepped out. Seeing Michael, the man grabbed his arm and pulled him in through the door that he had just come out of, and shut the door quickly. Just in time, apparently, as Michael heard the shouts of his pursuers pass on by. They hadn't seen the door, or hadn't seen Michael get pulled into it. Looking around him, Michael suddenly felt dazed and confused. The day was a lot brighter in here than it had been on the other side of the wall. The man's bright blonde hair and beard contrasted with Michael's black hair, and the man's skin was almost glowing with the bright yellow light that fell all around them, while the same light seemed to draw out the brown in Michael's tan skin. Michael's brown eyes darted here and there, taking in the vivid greens of trees, bushes, and lush grass, and the colorful flowers that were springing up from the ground and hanging from trellises everywhere. As he tried to understand how a garden of this intense beauty could exist in his very own city, where he and his friends struggled just to stay alive every day, and just who was this guy who had pulled him out of his battle so suddenly? Just then his attention was pulled to an ethereal, dark spot in the middle of the part of the garden where they were. As it grew, he could see what looked like stars and nebulae within the dark sphere. When it was as big as a big round door, the man again grabbed his arm and jumped into it, pulling Michael with him as he went. In a confusing sensation, they seemed to be floating but going somewhere at the same time. Soon Michael became aware of 3 large beings who seemed to be sitting in a circle, very relaxed, but at the same time in a deep discussion. Because nothing seemed to have any solid form, at least not the sort he was used to, he couldn't tell what they were sitting on, but they were all sprawled out as if they were on cushy couches. Slowly, the man and Michael seemed to pull in and sit down on the same whatever it was, to listen in on the discussion. But instead of using words like the languages of our world, these large beings seemed to be communicating in mental pictures that were somehow passing from one to another. Michael could see the mental pictures, too. As he looked or listened, whatever it could be called, he saw that they were making plans to put a particular planet at just the right distance from a sun so that it would be able to support life. And they were planning to make this planet a veritable paradise in every way. After they had prepared everything very beautiful and lush and perfect, they were planning to create humans to live on this planet. When they got to the part about the humans, Michael could feel a bit of their heart, the intense, passionate, overwhelming love that they already felt for these creatures that they hadn't even created yet. It actually brought tears to his eyes, feeling this emotion emanating from the large beings. And he felt their longing to express this love, and their longing for the humans to be able to see and know and understand the intense love that was in the heart of these beings for them. As Michael wiped away some tears, he saw them forming a plan for how to express their love for the humans. He saw them planning to put a tree in the garden that the humans would live in, one tree out of all of the beautiful, good trees that would produce a fruit that would not be good for the humans. A choice would be given to the humans where they could choose something that would cause them to fall into suffering. If they made that choice, they would need to be rescued. The price that these beings would pay on behalf of the humans to rescue them was almost unimaginable, but they felt satisfied that it would show how much they loved and valued the people that they were planning to make. Suddenly, the cosmic scene disappeared, and Michael found himself sitting on a rock in an old garden full of dead trees and dried up vines. The brick wall around it was still there, and the wooden door, but nothing else looked like it had when he came in. The man was nowhere to be found. After this experience, Michael felt unspeakably sad to be back in his real world. From time to time, he would come back to the wooden door and walk into the old abandoned garden, always hoping that somehow it would be like it had been that day. All that he ever found was the faintest trace of the feeling that he had felt when he was watching the conversation between those large cosmic beings. Eventually, he survived to finish high school and turned 18. On the day he turned 18, he joined the Navy. After the training, he was sent off in a boat to travel the world for the better part of 4 years. Here he met another guy who had joined the Navy the day he turned 18. His name was Gabe, and he was the gunner's first mate. Gabe was a tall, lanky, charismatic white boy with dark blue eyes and dark blonde hair. During their years in the Navy, Michael and Gabe had a lot of wild adventures. Gabe had a penchant for doing crazy, dangerous things that he wasn't supposed to be doing. Like Big Z back home, Gabe's motto was, "If what you are doing can't kill you, you aren't living." After one particularly crazy night, as they were trying to hitchhike back to the boat from somewhere they weren't supposed to be, in a country where they didn't speak the language, Michael had to ask himself why he always ended up with this kind of friends, but of course he didn't have an answer. Fortunately, Gabe also seemed to have an unusual portion of good luck and would pick up at least a few words of the language wherever they were, and they made it back to the boat and managed to not get into trouble there. One night, when the boat was going through the Straits of Gibraltar, someone shot some kind of heavy artillery at them from the Moroccan coast. It narrowly missed Gabe and Michael, who were on deck on duty. Quickly, Gabe alerted their superiors, who rushed up to see what was going on. More shots were fired on them, so they opened fire in return. It was dark and chaotic and very noisy on deck. In all the chaos, Michael felt someone grab his arm and whisk him down through a trap door on the deck, but instead of the dark interior of the ship, he found himself in the daylight, near a primitive street of some kind, surrounded by an equally noisy crowd to the one he had just been whisked away from. In the middle of the cobblestone street, there was a shredded, blood-red man struggling to carry a large wooden cross, even though his back was one huge open wound, no skin left on it at all. His muscles were shredded, and in places his organs and bones could be seen. Michael's mind shot back to the conversation he had heard with the cosmic beings a few years before. Tears sprang to his eyes and rolled unheeded down his face. He knew this was the price they had agreed to pay to rescue humans from their suffering. After the man fell under the weight of the heavy wooden beam, the Roman soldiers yanked a man out of the crowd to carry the instrument of death for the bloody, beaten man. Without even a second thought, Michael followed the man, along with the crowd around him. Eventually they all arrived at a hill that looked eerily like a skull. Here the soldiers set up the execution of the blood-red man, along with 2 other criminals, one on either side of him. Soon Michael found himself standing at this man's feet, looking up at his blood-streaked face. As the man looked down into Michael's eyes, Michael felt that love that he had felt that day when he had the strange experience in the garden. He felt that same presence that he had felt that day, and he wished this feeling would never end. But all too soon, all this disappeared, and he found himself inside the dark ship again. Coming back out through the trapdoor, he looked around. The skirmish apparently had ended, and everyone seemed to be okay. Since he didn't really know what had happened, he felt a bit disoriented, but he didn't say anything to anyone, and no one asked him where he had been. A couple of weeks later, they were in Italy. While they were there, Gabe and Michael went to visit the Vatican in Rome. As they entered the cool, high-ceilinged cathedral, Michael felt a presence really similar to what he had felt in his 2 strange encounters. Looking over at Gabe, he could see that Gabe felt it too. They looked around, but it seemed like no one else even noticed it. Walking to the front of the cathedral, Michael saw a statue of a man nailed to a cross, similar to what he had seen that night on the boat. Staring, Michael's mind went back to everything he had seen in that encounter. Tears came to his eyes as he remembered. He wished he could feel that love and that presence all the time. Coming up to stand beside him, Gabe noticed his tears, but he just turned to look at the statue too. Michael saw that Gabe felt stirred emotionally too by what it represented. "Who is that man?" Michael asked Gabe. Gabe looked a little surprised at the question, but he responded, "It's Jesus, God's son." "God's son?" Michael repeated, looking back at the statue. So many questions tumbled around in his mind because he had never been to church. Gabe, on the other hand, had been to church almost every Sunday of his life before he had joined the Navy, and a lot of other extra times too. Plus, his mom used to read him Bible stories at night before bed. After that, whenever they were out drinking, Michael would ply Gabe with all kinds of questions about God and the Bible. Gabe didn't mind at all, and he would answer anything he asked. It didn't bother him to talk about these things in a bar or anywhere else because Gabe was a genuine, authentic person, and there were no compartments in his life. He was who he was, no matter where he was or who he was with. Although Gabe knew a lot about the Bible, he still had serious misconceptions about God because his father, who called himself a Christian and always served in the church, was so arrogant and self-indulgent and abusive in every way, at home and at work. Although Gabe's dad was bipolar, so there were times when he would be in a good mood as long as no one crossed him, he was an abuser through and through, and the abuse expressed itself in different ways with his different children depending on their personalities and how they interacted with him. Because of Gabe's life experiences, he wasn't able to give Michael a good understanding of who God is, or a good overall understanding of what the Bible is about, but he did fill in a lot of gaps that Michael had in his mind from not being around church at all growing up. When Michael learned about the Trinity of God, that he is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, he began to put together what he had experienced in his encounters, that the three cosmic beings were God, and that their plan involved what Jesus had done on the cross. After his time in the Navy, Michael came back home to Texas. By this time, Big Z had gone to prison, and the gang was all either dead, in prison, or moved away. When Michael went out to the bar, he met some new friends. Izzy was a 6'4" brown-eyed biker who was losing his brown hair in the front, but wore it kind of long in the back still. Kenny was just as tall, a blonde-haired hippie with hair down to the middle of his back and green-brown eyes. While hanging out with these guys, Michael started trying the different drugs that they were trying. Izzy didn't like marijuana because he was from Oregon, where it was so strong that he couldn't even scratch his itching nose for hours until it wore off, and he burnt his thumb where he couldn't move it away from the hot pipe. He didn't like not getting anything done. He preferred speed, which helped him work on his cars all night and figure out how to fix things without so much of his usual debilitating frustration. When he wasn't working on his cars, he would draw super detailed pictures, since he couldn't sleep at all for days. On the other hand, Kenny liked marijuana. He was a pagan and liked how it enhanced his spiritual experiences. Besides that, it helped him fight off his suicidal tendencies and made him enjoy nature even more than he already did. One night, Michael went with Izzy to pick up some meth from his dealer. They waited a long time, and the dealer said that his supplier didn't have enough to fill the order. Izzy was picking up for some other people as well as himself. They left and came back another night, and it still wasn't done. After they waited a while, the dealer sighed and got his gun and left. The next day they saw in the news that the man who was their dealer's supplier, whom Izzy knew by name, was found dead in a creek with a bullet in the back of his head. While Izzy talked to Michael about it that night at the bar, Michael could tell that he was shook about it and thinking of leaving the area to get out of the dangerous lifestyle that he had fallen into. Another night, Michael was out with Kenny and another friend of Kenny's, and they stopped by this friend's dealer's house. The dealer was angry about something and threatened to kill them all, but Kenny was like, "Hey, I'm a hippie. I like love and peace. I don't want to fight you." Thankfully, Kenny had that same charisma and luck that Gabe had, and they got away safely, but later, that friend of Kenny's was found dead, and it looked like he had been tortured by drug cartel people. Apparently, he had owed too much money to his dealer for too long. Seeing this was a lot for Kenny. Michael could tell that Kenny was thinking of leaving too. Actually, Michael was having a lot of the same thoughts and feelings as Izzy and Kenny. It's just that Texas was actually his home, whereas they were both from other places and had family in yet other places, so they kind of had options that Michael didn't feel like he had. About this time, Michael's grandma started inviting him to come to church with her. Finally, he decided to go. When he arrived at church, they were already singing. To his surprise, Michael felt that feeling during the music at this church, that presence and love that he had felt in his encounters with God and Jesus. He was hooked. Here was a place where he could come regularly to experience that feeling that he was always wanting to chase after, but not knowing how or where to find it.